It seems very likely now that MDMA will be made a medicine for PTSD in the next few years. I've estimated now, since LSD was banned, over 100 million people have died prematurely from alcohol use. And Queen Victoria, by the way, she was very keen on cannabis. She used it for period pains.
Professor David Nutt, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you're the founder of Drug Science and the chairman. Can you tell me a little bit about that organisation and what you guys do?
So Drug Science is a charity which is set up to tell the truth about drugs. I set it up over 10 years ago when I was sacked from my position as the government's chief drugs advisor. I was very fortunate because within a day of being sacked, a successful young stock trader emailed me and said, look, if I give you this same amount of money as you were using to run the ACMD, the government's advisory committee, would you set up a parallel committee and tell the truth rather than have us listening to the misinformation the government was putting out? And of course, I said, fantastic. And since then, Drug Science has been rolling. And his money ran out after a couple of years, but we've managed to raise funds from charities, from grants, and from a whole range of sources, and also, of course, from selling copies of my book.
Is ecstasy the same thing as MDMA?
So originally, when MDMA was rediscovered by Alexander Shulgin in the 1960s, he said it was a very special kind of amphetamine, different from all the other drugs he tested. It had more warmth, more clarity of insight. He introduced it to his wife, who was a psychotherapist, and she said, wow, this is amazing. This will be very helpful for couples whose sort of relationships are breaking down, as happens over time. You gradually grow a sort of, layers of hostility. And they used it, and many therapists used it, and they called it empathy. And it was legal, and it was fine. And then, and this is where it all went wrong, is when the rave scene, the club owners realized it was a legal amphetamine, whereas amphetamines were illegal. So they started selling it, and they changed the name from empathy, which people wouldn't be interested in, to ecstasy, which of course a lot of young clubbers were looking for. And then ecstasy was initially MDMA, and then it's got corrupted because of various attempts to block the production of MDMA. People have put other things in it like PMA or PMMA or caffeine, or all sorts of things have been put into ecstasy tablets instead, as well as MDMA. But still, a lot of the ones that are being sold now are still strong. In fact, they're very strong MDMA.
Isn't it being used to treat PTSD?
That is right. That is one of the most remarkable inventions in medicine in the last decade. And there's a paper that just came out, I think last week, the biggest trial ever of MDMA for PTSD. And it showed very, very powerful effects. And it seems very likely now that MDMA will be made a medicine for PTSD in the next few years.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you think, I guess there's a number of reasons, but why do you think MDMA has such a bad rap in the media?
Well, the answer is why all drugs that are banned have a bad rap is because there are political advantages in being hostile, not particularly to drugs, but to drug users. So what happened? The rave scene was remarkable because the police loved it. For the first time, young people were not using alcohol. Police were going to raves and they were being hugged. Whereas previously they were going to parties and beaten up. And the police loved it. Everyone was really happy with raves, except the media, the right-wing media. And I think it was because of the name. I mean, these right-wing editors, they probably never had any ecstasy and their ecstatic experience in their life. And the idea that young people were having it because they popped a pill was just anathema to them. They wanted to stop young people having fun. So they created hysteria. They goaded politicians. And the politicians then realized that, in Britain, in most countries, the right-wing press control the politics. So the politicians did what the press told them, which was ban it, because they thought they'd get votes for banning it.
Because you had a bit of a tough time when you were working for the government with that whole process, didn't you?
Yes. Well, I started working for the government. I actually, interestingly, cut my teeth on ecstasy, on MDMA. I was brought in to help the government in the early 1990s to deal with the problem that some young people were dying, usually of dehydration and hyperthermia, high body temperature from MDMA. And I got interested in the whole notion of drugs and drug control at that point. And actually, at that time, we made some suggestions, like, for instance, there should always be free water in a bar, in a club, which there is still today. And that made a dramatic difference. People don't die of hyperthermia. We have water and you have chill out rooms. You don't die of hyperthermia anymore. Right. So then I started thinking, well, why is this drug illegal? How harmful is it? And I realized it wasn't that harmful at all. And I started to think about how we could assess the harms of drugs. And when I was brought in to advise the government, I did it on the condition that we developed a scale for properly evaluating all the different harms of drugs to see which were the most harmful. And of course, it turned out that ecstasy wasn't anything like as harmful as drugs like heroin or crack cocaine, but it was still in Schedule 1 Class A. In fact, we discovered about 1999 that you got longer prison sentences for dealing MDMA than you got for dealing heroin. That's because ecstasy is for fun. So you've got to be punished. Heroin, if you're forced to take heroin, well, you're addicted, so that's different. But if you just, the idea, British culture, and I guess other cultures too, they don't like the idea that you can have fun on a pill. The only way to have fun is to have a cold bath and be beaten by your form master, really.
If you, because you talk with MDMA, you talk about people you need bottled water and you brought that in and chill out rooms and stuff. As far as, I'm guessing there's going to be some young people that listen to this that have taken or will take MDMA at some point. And this isn't meant to be an advertisement at all, but there's certain, you can drink too much water, can't you? And there are some drinks that are better than others to drink with it.
Okay, really important point here. Yes. So what we've seen in the last 30 years is a complete transformation. It was in the early days, people were dying because they didn't drink enough water, because the club owners were switching off they even switched off the toilets to stop people getting water because they wanted them to drink from the bar. They wanted them to drink alcohol. Now, almost all the deaths we see from MDMA are young women who are dying of what we call water poisoning, because young women seem to be very sensitive to one effect of MDMA, which is that the MDMA releases a hormone which retains water. So the classic example, of course, was Leah Betts. Poor Leah thought that she had to drink water to protect herself when she had the experiences of MDMA, but in fact, she drank 7 liters of water and she died of water poisoning. So the message is that if you're not sweating, you don't need to drink. And it's best not to drink if you're a young woman and you're not to drink water or anything else if you've taken MDMA, because you'll have harder time than most getting rid of the water. And if you are going to drink, it's best to drink a drink that has a sort of physiological mixture, like a sports drink, rather than just plain water.
Psychedelics, they have a bad reputation as well. But after reading your book, Drugs Without the Hot Air, it's a very harsh reputation, isn't it?
Well, that's even more political. I mean, when LSD was discovered in 1943, made available in the 1950s to researchers, it was seen as the revolution in psychiatry and a revolution in neuroscience. It was going to help understand consciousness and all sorts of mental processes. And it was remarkable. In the 1950s and 60s, it was shown to be the most effective drug we've ever had to treat alcoholism. But
really? What, LSD?
Yeah, LSD. Yes. 6 trials of LSD, 1 or 2 doses for alcoholics, produced. It's twice as effective as the best treatment we have today. But it's been banned. It's been banned since 1967. So what's that? That's 50 years. Why was LSD banned? It was banned because the anti-war protesters in America, the anti-Vietnam War protesters in America, some of them took LSD. But the government didn't know what to do with the anti-war protesters. It associated them with LSD. It didn't like the fact, that the music was changing. You've gone from Buddy Holly to, the Grateful Dead. Everything, LSD was changing everything. Governments were terrified. It thought it would change. Young people would stop. All young people would then be anti-war, anti the establishment, anti the American way of life and international control. And so they decided to ban the drug, thinking that would stop its use. Of course, it didn't stop its use at all. What it did was stop people like me, doctors, using it. I've estimated now, since LSD was banned, over 100 million people have died prematurely from alcohol use. Over 2 million a year. Now it's 3.5 million a year, but let's say it was 2 million a year for 50 years. That's 100 million people have died from alcohol abuse. If LSD had only helped 10% of them, that's 10 million lives saved. Now you say, how many lives have been saved by banning LSD? Well, it might have killed one a year, so 50, 100. The disproportionate loss to medicine is, the loss to medicine is so much greater than the gain from protecting people from LSD. I think it's the worst censorship of medicine there's ever been.
You mentioned treating alcoholism, treating depression. Is that something that has been done, or is that something that is being done with LSD and psychedelics?
So we've done 2 trials, the 2 big trials of psilocybin, magic mushroom juice, in depression. A group at Johns Hopkins has done the same. So there's 3 studies in depression, and they show very powerful effects of psilocybin to treat depression. Just to say, the reason we don't work with LSD, we've studied LSD in the brain, and we know it works powerfully like psilocybin, but the reason we don't use it clinically, the 2 reasons. One is the trips last too long. So we have to keep people in hospital overnight because the trips can last for up to 15 to 18 hours. Uh-huh. And the second is that LSD is just one of those words that makes politicians and journalists and media editors go insane. It's the one, you say LSD and they say no, whereas psilocybin, no one knows how to say it, how to spell it. And mushrooms are pretty safe. Millions of people use mushrooms every year. So that's why we use psilocybin. But it's a very powerful treatment for depression. If you're interested in the use of psychedelics to treat depression, then if you go onto the BBC Catch-Up iPlayer, May the 19th, BBC 2, 9 p.m. UK time, there's an hour-long documentary where they have followed patients that have been in our trial all the way through the treatment. And it's extremely beautiful. Their descriptions of the impacts of the psilocybin and the benefits of their depression. It's very moving. I recommend everyone who's interested in this to watch it. So what advice would I give to people? One, don't do it alone. Make sure if you're doing it with other people, do it with people that have done it before. Make sure if you can, it's difficult because they're illegal, but use something that other people have proven to be safe on themselves. Always make sure that at least one of you isn't taking anything in case things go wrong. Always take a lowest dose. Don't overdose to start with if you've never experienced it. So take the very minimal dose you think is going to work, and make sure you don't take any other drugs with it.
And some people might take something like that and be waiting for it to kick in and think it's not working and maybe take more, and that could be a problem. How long should it take to kick in if someone's taking, I don't know, any of that kind of thing?
Well, you don't ever double your dose. This has been a huge problem with the ecstasy, because back in the 7-8 years ago, when ecstasy tablets were being replaced by PMA tablets, people that come up with ecstasy is normally about 30 minutes. PMA, it takes an hour. People at 30 minutes, people are saying, oh, this is bum ecstasy. They were taking another 2 tablets, but each PMA tablet was stronger than an MDMA tablet. And by the time the 3 tablets got in their brain, an hour and a half later, they were dead.
God.
So never double up, ever. Because most, if you don't get an effect within an hour, then you've just wait for a few hours and start again, or wait till another day. The other thing you can do, and this is completely legal, is there are retreats in Holland where the mushroom's legal. You can go and have an experience with other people, with guides, a completely safe one, as far as anything can be safe in a protected environment. Or you can go to Spain, which has ayahuasca, is legal in Spain, so you can have ayahuasca retreats in Spain. So,
yeah, I know someone who's done that, who very high functioning, successful businessman that went over to South America and went to a retreat and did that and came back and just can't speak highly of it. Can't speak highly enough of it. It is eye-opening for him.
Well, one of the things we've discovered is almost all the research that we have done with psychedelics has been funded by philanthropists. In the 15 years of our research, even though we're transforming the treatment of depression, the government has given us virtually nothing. And it's turned out our first grant was approved, and we put in 5 subsequent grants, and everyone has been turned down. But the good news is there are some very rich people out there who have become rich because they took psychedelics. And they are funding our research. And of course, the best example is Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs created the most, before Amazon, the biggest company in the history of the world. And he said LSD, one of the 5 most important experiences of my life. And LSD gave Steve Jobs this phenomenal vision, which was, don't just build computers like Dell. Let's build works of art that are computers, like the machine I'm using now, the Airbook, which is a ridiculously beautiful and effective piece of machinery. And, so you can argue that LSD created the most powerful company, certainly computer company the world's ever seen.
What about the long-term health effects from taking any sort of psychedelic or MDMA?
Well, yes, absolutely. And we've got to disentangle the fears that have been promoted by governments and regulators versus the reality. So I'm going to give you some examples. Who discovered LSD? Albert Hoffman. Used it regularly, died at 102.
Okay.
The first British person to take LSD, Joel Elkes, professor of psychiatry at Birmingham University, lived to 103. So the idea that LSD fries your brain, I mean, there's a lot of interest in these drugs actually promoting brain health and actually increasing longevity. There are studies going on to see if you can actually treat Alzheimer's with psychedelics. So the answer is there's very little evidence of any health harms, and it may be beneficial. And it's particularly beneficial for mental health. So I mean, there's less suicides, there's less depression in people who have taken psychedelics. It seems to help their brain cope better with life.
What's the process that goes into making cocaine? Like, as far as like, I know, like, let's say it comes from South America or Peru or wherever it comes from, and then before it gets to the streets, I'm guessing it's cut with a whole lot of different stuff. That's also probably not good for you. I'm guessing.
Well, some of it's not good. Yeah, you're right. Some bit strictnine's not very good for you. Keeps you awake though. Hitler liked strychnine, but it's not good for you. What is cut with is what they've got at the time. So a lot of people are cutting it now with this anti-helminth thing. This treatment called levamisole, which is an anti-helminthic drug, because it looks like cocaine. So it probably helps you clear out your guts, bugs from your gut, but it isn't particularly good if you take too much. So but by and large, the cutting agents in most drugs aren't the toxic agents. The only exception is this, and this is not cutting, but there's a very worrying new trend, and that is to replace or to supplement opiates with fentanyls. Because heroin is actually hard to get, it's expensive. So now gangs are now putting fentanyls in with heroin to give it more of a kick, more of an opiate kick. And fentanyls can be very, very toxic. They're so potent. Some of them are 1,000 times more potent than heroin. So it's so potent that people don't know how to weigh it out. If you weigh it out and you accidentally inhale some, you die. So, people don't bother to weigh it out. They just put a couple of specks in, but one speck could kill you. So that is the real killer at present. It's not the other cutting agents, but it's the supplements to heroin with fentanyls that are really dangerous.
Oh my goodness.
Or spice. Of course, the other supplements, synthetic cannabinoids, are really very dangerous as well.
Wasn't Queen Victoria a big fan of the real stuff?
People don't realize that the British Empire was the biggest drug dealer in the history of the world. So the British, East India Company made millions, and that's a lot of money in those days. That's billions, selling opium to the Chinese and selling cannabis to the Indians. So when we took over India, the Indians used to use cannabis. They call it ganja.
All right.
The original ganja it's a Indian name, an Indian way of taking. The Indians were taking cannabis. They had a drink called bang, and they smoked it called ganja. The whole origin of Hinduism, the Hindu religion, is built out of drugs, because Lord Shiva got his visions from sleeping under a cannabis bush, probably after he smoked it. Anyway, that's another story. But so cannabis used in India, the Brits go there. They think, hey, this is a huge market. It's a bit like taking over the drinks market in England or Great Britain. So basically, they made the Indians grow ganja for us, and then we sold it back to the Indians. And then the money came back to Britain, and so the great Victorian Empire that Britain was, or the center of the empire, my university, Imperial College, it's got this enormous tower to Queen Victoria built on drug money from selling cannabis to Indians and selling opium to the Chinese. Now, the Chinese didn't want the opium. The Chinese knew that opium was bad for their people, but we forced them in the Opium Wars, we forced the Chinese government to buy opium from us. And Queen Victoria, by the way, she was very keen on cannabis. She used it for period pains. She used it for pains after childbirth, like many women do. And I kind of have my feeling the reason there's so many kids is that she used to get a bit stoned up in Balmoral in the winter and have fun with Prince Albert.
Do you think cannabis should be legal?
Of course it should. Yeah, absolutely. But by legal, I mean it should be sold in regulated stores. I think I would call them a pharmacy, where you'd go and buy your cannabis pills or your cannabis spliffs or your cannabis oil for recreational as well as medical use.
Kind of like they have in the Netherlands.
Like they have in the Netherlands, like they have in Canada, like they have in Uruguay, like they have in, I think, 17 US states now.
Do you think alcohol should be legal?
I think it should be regulated like it used to be in the old days, in licensed
Really?
as opposed to when I was a teenager, the only place you could buy alcohol was in a bar or an off-license, a licensed premises. Now you can, the reason we got such an explosion of harms from alcohol is because we liberated access in supermarkets, and that just doubled consumption and tripled the harms.
Professor David Nutt, thank you so much for joining me.
Andy, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you.
Your book, Drugs Without Hot Air, the revised and updated edition, is out now. And where else can people find out more about what you're doing?
Go on the Drug Science website. Follow me on Twitter. I tweet a lot, but only about these kind of interesting things. You'll never find out what I'm eating or drinking, but you will find out about my research and my talks and programs, etc.
Brilliant. And thank you very much for listening. We'll be back again next week.